Good evening, Deputy Minister.
Good evening.
My name is Brendan Miller, and I am counsel for Freedom Corp, and I'm a part of that which is a entity that represents the protesters that were in Ottawa in January and February of 2022. Sir, I want to start off with something you had mentioned in your chief with respect to Mayor Watson, stating that he invoked the state of emergency to put pressure on the province. And you said that that seemed to be political. You didn't get much of a chance to elaborate on that, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity.
I didn't say it was political. What I said was that Section 4 of the EMCPA does not allow for a municipal declaration of emergency for the purpose of putting pressure on another order of government. Okay.
And so that purpose, in your view, then, if it was the true purpose based on the call transcript with respect to Mayor Watson, that was not a proper purpose to declare that?
If that was the exclusive reason for declaring a municipal emergency, it would not have been proper.
Okay. Now, I understand, and just dealing with this, the background, you're familiar with Mayor Watson's background, is that fair?
What do you mean?
His history and work in provincial politics and in the municipal politics. Are you familiar with that?
I've never met Mayor Watson. The only thing that I've learned about Mayor Watson was that he was at one point in time a provincial minister. I don't know what portfolio he held. But you're familiar, of course, with Minister Blair. You used to work with him when he was at the Toronto Police Service, I take it? Yes, sir.
And that was, you were a superintendent there at the time he was chief?
Yes, sir.
Right. And is it fair to say, and there's a history between Minister Blair and Premier Ford, they have a very not good relationship, let's say that?
I can't speak to that, sir.
When you were at the Toronto Police Service, were you aware of the conflict that both Minister Blair and Premier Ford had with one another?
Commissioner, it's Darryl Cluza for the province of Ontario. I'm not sure of the relevance of this line of questioning.
Based on the records that aren't yet in evidence that I've reviewed over the last few days, it is.
I'm not sure what the relevance is as between the whether they got along or didn't get along.
Well, it appears from the record, sir, that part of it was that the minister was trying to, at times in text messages, sir, I don't want to get into it just too far yet, but the relationship between himself and Mr. Ford is referenced in various text messages, not yet in evidence from Minister Blair, sir. I want to establish what that relationship was like. If you'd like me to deal with it directly with Minister Blair, I can hold off.
I think that's probably where it's appropriate, given this witness is not familiar with the...
It was simply he was a superintendent during the conflict that arose, and it was during the time that now Minister Blair was the chief of the Toronto Police Service when he had a conflict with then Chief Blair when he was a councillor under the tutelage of his brother, who was the mayor at the time. But I can move on, sir, I just thought this witness, of course, having been a superintendent at the time, would have that information. I can move on from it.
Well, you can ask him the question whether he knows what either of them were thinking.
Right.
I'll let that, but...
Yes, so, sir, you're aware that going back to their days as Minister Blair when he was the chief and Doug Ford when he was city councillor, both Minister Blair and Doug Ford had a conflict with one another at that time, and you are aware of that?
I can't speak to that.
Okay, thank you. So, with respect to, you discussed mediation and the use of politicians in that regard with respect to a protest and respect to a blockade, and said that that's how sometimes politicians can be used. Do you want to give some examples of when that has happened that you've seen in your experience as both a police officer as well as in your current position?
So two examples come to mind. Minister Jones made herself available to the protesters in Windsor. Another example was when Federal Minister Mark Miller made himself available to the blockade, the CN rail blockade in January of 2020 in an attempt to mediate and negotiate.
Right. And I take it that a lot of that happens in coordination with the relevant police service of the jurisdiction. They actually make a request that some of the political executive branch come and attend and help assist them quell the issue. Is that fair?
That's the way it ought to happen. It did not happen that way in January of 2020.
Right. January of 2020 or 2022?
In January of 2020, when Minister
Right.
Mark Miller made himself available to negotiate the CN blockade.
Okay. And so that was outside of, he did that outside of police advice? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that he did that without consulting the OPP.
Oh, okay. So in this case, I take it now, we've heard in evidence that OPP Inspector Baudouin, who is essentially doing all the PLT work, he was putting forth a plan of PLT that would involve either someone from the federal government, provincial government. I don't think he really cared who it was as long as it was effective. If the inspector had asked your government for assistance based on your knowledge, would one of the executive branch, the political executive branch that is elected members, being ministers, would they have participated in that?
Yes.
And from your understanding, despite Inspector Baudouin's request of the federal elected executive, do you have any knowledge of the political branch of the federal executive, despite or upon his request from Inspector Baudouin agreeing to do the same?
No, I had discussions with Deputy Minister Stewart about getting federal ministers to the table, and Deputy Minister Stewart was not successful.
Okay. But your government was willing and able to do that if was asked?
I know for a fact that Minister Jones was, yes.
Right. And I just want to deal with a little, spend my last point in time and to clarify both for the public, and I know that you've, I think, been the first witness here to make this very clear, and I think it's worth emphasizing. When it comes to policing in this entire country, police are supposed to be 100% independent of the political branch. Is that fair?
When it comes to investigations, deployment, operations, yes.
Right. And so just because a mayor, just because a prime minister, just because the minister of emergency preparedness or a premier wants them to do something, that's not supposed to have an effect on their decisions. They have to assess them themselves, and they don't follow essentially directions from elected government. They are independent.
Correct. With regards to operations and deployment and investigations, yes.
And one of the reasons that's the case is that you don't want police, who have probably the most power out of any officials in the country domestically, you don't want them to do things for political reasons, right?
Correct.
Right. In your opinion, in looking at the facts as you know it, as a deputy minister, as a former police officer, in your view, was this situation politicalized?
I know that there were many politicians that were involved in discussions, that it was an urgent situation, and so many politicians expressed their views publicly.
And did that undermine police enforcement and police tactics and police decisions?
No, I don't think so. I think the commissioner and I, certainly the commissioner, were focused on providing the resources that Ottawa needed to dismantle the entire occupation. So from my perspective, all of that was noise. The commissioner was focused on providing those resources subject to a fully developed operational plan to dismantle the entire occupation.
Did any of the conduct of the federal political branch, that is the elected ministers and prime minister, did any of their statements in the media and to the public at large create any issues for the police dealing with the situation?
That would be a question for the police that were dealing with the issue. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.